Welcome back. Today is, what are we calling this? Freeform Friday?
Freeform Friday, Fun Friday, anything goes.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to be doing Friday podcasts. We did our first one last week where we talk about pretty much whatever we want to talk about, and maybe it's real estate related, maybe it's not. A lot of what we're going to be sharing with you are, I think, insights as far as like what Julian, insights is too strong of a word. Really, we're just going to have a free-form conversation about the things that we're reading, the things that we're listening to, some of the conversations we had in the previous week. And last week, we talked about everything from, health things to aliens to, all kinds of different topics.
Anything goes.
Anything goes. And so really the reason that we're doing this is because one of the things that Julie and I are very conscientious of is that we have to keep our own brains frosty, and frosty is a way of saying really kind of alert and awake and not being complacent. So when you've been doing something for a long period of time, like we have been doing with coaching and these podcasts, for example, and many of you are in the same situation, if you don't inject new information, stuff that has nothing to do with your normal fare, your brain's going to go a little bit soft, and you have to, change it up quite frequently, frankly. The better you get at one particular task, the more important it is for you to really start injecting again more, I think, totally, completely weird, different types of thinking. Mm-hmm. And it really does lend to brain elasticity. It's funny, I was trying to look for the word brain elasticity, and I was struggling to find the words at the same time.
That's kind of ironic.
Brain Well, you get my point? Yeah. And some people say, like, one of the, as far as intellectually, one of the things all of us should strive for is to be polymaths. And polymaths are where you have a high level understanding of many different topics. And you do have the mental capacity for all of that. So just keep all of that in mind when we talk about things on our Fun Friday shows, that we are going to talk about things that oftentimes seem irreverent. And I was so, frankly, thrilled that we didn't really get any negative feedback from last week's show, even though we talked about a million different things.
Because that was like the launch of this new Friday show.
It was, and people really seemed to like it. And so you guys are giving us permission to go down deeper down the rabbit hole of all of our other topics that we like to talk about.
That said, if you are a fresh, brand new listener, note to self, yes, as you see on your podcast app there in your thumbnail, generally speaking, we talk about real estate topics, training scripts, etc. That's our Monday through Thursday show. And I think we have, more than 5,000 previous shows that you can search by topic. You can get caught up. So our typical fare is indeed about real estate if you're just fresh to us. Our longtime listeners understand that, but I'm sure that there are some out there that are going, what?
I don't know if this occurred to you, Jules, but maybe our longtime listeners are just glad to listen to us on Friday so they don't have to listen to us talk about real estate.
Exactly. Special shout out to all of you guys.
So one of again, we have no agenda, and Julie hates doing the podcast without notes.
Yep.
And so this is a good experiment and experience for her, an experiment for all of us, and her winging it, which, again, Julie is not a winger.
That's more of a warning than anything else.
Okay. Well, so we agreed to one thing. The only thing we agreed to is we were going to start out by talking about the fact that we're starting to hear people refer to this age that we're in as the golden age, or the start of a new golden age. And I want to just set this up by making sure all of you understand that I don't think the context of the new golden age has really anything to do with politics, to be honest with you. It doesn't have anything to do with the new president. It doesn't have anything to do with the new administration. The new golden age, I think, harks back to periods in human history where there have been other golden ages. And again, very rarely have they been political. Matter of fact, in most cases, really in all cases, the politics have followed what it has been happening societally. And so that's what I want to start out by talking about. So that's the only thing we've agreed to today. Is, Julie, what is all this talk about the golden age? What does it mean to you? And I know you've been listening and watching listening and watching on YouTube and reading a lot of stuff about this, new phenomena that everyone seems to agree that we're commencing.
That's a good question. So I think that it is the combination of enthusiasm, things being more positive on an intellectual basis, on a cultural basis, on a technological basis, and all of those things kind of coming together at the same time. It reminds me of, Zoe's studying the Renaissance at school. And that was another kind of golden era where you had advances in technology, advances in, that's when books became prevalent. Books weren't super expensive anymore. It started to be available to everybody. And think about what's happening in terms of space exploration and energy and all of these things. It's not just one thing. So I think, in previous eras, it was like the time that we accomplished this, but not all of these other things at the same time. And I think coupled with that is maybe an exhaustion of negativity and doom and gloom, and things aren't great, and the country's going down the tubes and all that kind of stuff. I think now we've got more enthusiasm to move forward and get back maybe to some of our roots. You could talk about founding fathers stuff. There's a lot of different directions we could go, but I think it's the combination of moving forward intellectually, scientifically. You can talk about AI, all that kind of thing.
Well, we're moving forward at the same time. I think you could argue that we're moving back too. So it's almost like, I think about Zoe, right? Zoe is so determined to learn things on her own, even if it basically results in somewhat of a painful learning experience. And so if you only study history, most people only know history in their time frames and their lifelines, right? So you'll know, if you're 55, you'll know history fairly well from, say, 1980 to modern era. That's your scope of history, but you don't really take the time to go back into history and really to study when there's been other similar things happen again in civilization. Doesn't even matter which civilization it was. I mean, the Golden Age was originally, I hit up Chat GPT and put it in Golden Age. What was the Golden Age? And it spit out a bunch of history. But here's what I'm trying to express to you. What we're experiencing, in our opinion, is, as Julie just described, but in addition to that, what it feels like is that it's not a rejection necessarily. It's almost like people needed to test their precepts with regards to how a lot of people were raised in the popular cultural phenoms. For example, and I'll use this one as an example because there's something that I think I would have not predicted. I just find it, I'm speechless. Number one podcast in the world right now is a Christian podcast, more than Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan's podcast get an average of 13 million downloads.
Per episode.
4 days of the week, he's having 13 million people listen to him for 3 hours.
That's epic.
Yeah. And so that podcast has been number one for a long period of time. And Joe's been having a lot more religious people on his podcast. But in addition to that, the number one listened to or downloaded podcast right now is a Christian-based podcast. Now, why am I sharing that with you? Because what that should indicate to all of us is what's happened is we've gone through this long era, starting arguably in the 60s and into the 70s, where people are exploring other religions, other ideas about spirituality. And I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, stringing all these thoughts together. So people seem to have been going through, culturally, we are exploring sort of the whole New Age movement. I think, that was probably a big part of it, exploring Eastern religions and just doing all these things, kind of a mashup of things that weren't Christian. And I think maybe what was happening is a lot of people culturally, again, were exploring. They were testing, okay, was this Christianity thing? Is this really what it's supposed to be? Is this it? Well, let's go see what else is out there.
What are the alternatives?
And I think fundamentally what's happened is the pendulum swung too far to people looking for, and this is the only explanation I can come up with, looking for a way to fill that spiritual hole that all of us have that only can be filled with God. That's what I think. Mm-hmm. And so what they did is they started filling it with, again, New Age stuff. They started filling it with the whole self-improvement genre is basically, heavily laced with New Ageism, all these other things. And the pendulum swung so far in that direction. And so the essence of the New Age movement is that you're the center of the universe. The essence of all that self-improvement stuff is that, think about The Secret, right? You manifest, the universe will deliver to you. It's a very sort of narcissistic approach to spirituality. And again, I'm trying not to criticize. I'm just using words to make a point quickly. So that is wholeheartedly right now, that sort of approach has now, I think, widely been rejected or starting to be rejected by folks that are realizing that approach to life, it didn't work for me. It hasn't worked for anyone I know. It didn't work for other people that came before me. Because really what religion provides more than anything is essentially if you want to even remove the scripture from it, what religion provides is a structure or a blueprint or a roadmap, a set of rules to live your life by. And when you do, generally speaking, your outcome is going to be far more positive than when you don't.
Absolutely. It's basic guidelines. And, that's pretty consistent from religion to religion, but it provides you, a North Star, if you will, for decision making, for how you think about life, how you treat other people. One of the things when we looked up Golden Age, it said that historically when there's been a golden age, it's when people lived in peace and abundance and felt eternal youth. Now, why would they feel that way? It's because they did have some kind of a North Star, because they weren't in conflict like some of these other maybe non-religious things provided, right?
So the golden age thing that we hear people talking about now, it does have some historical perspective. Often golden ages refers to periods in history characterized by cultural, scientific, economic greatness, the golden age of Athens during the 5th century, all those types of things. And so if you scale this forward, there was golden ages in the 1930s and the 1950s, and there was 1920s, all these periods of time when there seems to be abundance, not just of material wealth, but abundance.
But also peace was a tenet of those times. We weren't at war with everybody.
It was. And so it does feel, at least to me, and obviously I think it feels like this to virtually everyone.
Yes.
Again, the number one podcast in the world right now is Christian-based, that the pendulum is swinging very much far faster than I ever would have anticipated. I think it's just almost inconceivable.
Whiplash, yeah.
It almost literally within like a week.
Yeah, well, some people are calling that the great vibe shift. I've heard that floating around. So that puts maybe a modern spin on it, but that's where people come around to thinking, like, I think one of the good examples of that, which ties into what you're talking about religion here, is when Joe Rogan interviewed Mel Gibson recently, on his podcast. And specifically, they were talking about Mel Gibson has a new movie coming out. I can't think of it at the top of my
Resurrection.
head. The Resurrection or the second part, Resurrection of Christ,
or
something like that. And one of the things that resonated with me, because Joe's listeners are mostly guys, guys, but I listen to them with you now and then. And we were listening to Mel Gibson talk, and he said when he's thinking about the Bible and Bible stories, that a lot of people say, oh, well, those are just like fables or parables or whatever, which they are stories. But his point was those were actual historic figures. Those were not fictional figures. And you and I watched something on Netflix not too long ago about Moses. I thought that was very well done. There were so many things that I know the basic stories like most people do, but there's so much more to it. And all of that goes into, that was interesting. That explains why this, right? So you put that into your own modern era thinking, and it helps you navigate things. And I think it does give you a centering feature that these non-religious things that people have followed, and maybe religious isn't the exact right word, but
they call themselves like spiritual, right? And then like and that's fine too. Everyone has their own journey. Yeah. Everyone has their own journey to faith. Everyone has their own journey to God.
But there's degrees to it, right?
And you don't have to make it so long and painful is the point.
Exactly.
There's a reason why essentially, if you look at, for example, any golden age, really, there's an element always of strong belief in God. Maybe one thing has to do with the other. And if we know statistically that you have a higher probability of having the life that you'd really like to have, just all the things you want in life, all the experiences that you want to have in life, if we know that there's a strong correlation between following the tenets of, Christianity, and frankly, a lot of other religions too. But if you follow those tenets on how you live your life, that you're going to have, most likely you're going to have a far better outcome than if you don't. That leads you somewhere. And it's also, if you look at what most people are searching for, what everyone's searching for, and I said this before, is in my observation, is they're searching for a way to feel connected with something. And sometimes that something is materialism. Sometimes that something is, recognition, being famous.
Sure.
Sometimes that something is, all kinds of different things.
It's some level of
alcohol, drugs.
Filling your cup on some level, right?
And so what we do is we look for, we're all walking around this empty space, and we're all sort of looking for something to fill it, right? And then there'll be somebody that comes along and says, well, I'll try this one on for size. And you'll say, well, everyone around me is doing that same thing. I'll try that one on for size. And then guess what? It it doesn't do the job. You end up where you started. And then look at Russell Brand, for example.
He's another good example.
Julie and I've met Russell Brand before, and this was back during his Katy Perry. He just divorced Katy Perry.
Yeah, we met him at Post Ranch in California.
Yeah, and let me tell you, he was creepy.
He was
Bro
creepy.
was straight up creepy. I'm going to tell a story.
The dude is smart, though. I mean, if you listen to him talk, go ahead.
So we're on this, and don't worry, we'll hopefully go back to where we were saying.
Yeah.
So we're standing on this deck, and if you guys have never been to Big Sur, California, if you've never been to Post Ranch, if you've never,
it's stunning.
It's stunning, just it is. And if you're in that part of the world, we're massively jealous of you. And all of you who are in that part of the world, and you have Point Lobos as is local to you. You owe it to your faithful podcast hosts to go to Point Lobos and go to that last parking lot where you can walk through and hear I don't know what kind of seals they are, but walk through that the stretch that goes around the coast that you can only get to from that last parking lot as you pull in from the main gate. You guys owe it to us, and then take pictures and then send them to us. Okay?
Yes, because that is one of our favorite places on earth.
It is. It's beautiful. And if you've never been there, I just gave you a new item for your bucket list. All right, so we're at Post Ranch, and it is pitch dark outside. We're on this deck, and we're looking at stars. And we're looking at stars with, big telescope, and there's this guy that knows where all the constellations are and the whole thing. And so Julie and I didn't originally know that Post Ranch was essentially a hangout of all these big-name celebrities from Hollywood. You think I'm making that up, but I'm really truly not. We originally went there as probably 20 years ago once.
Close to that, yeah.
Yep. And then from that experience, that's when we were tripping across, like, holy crap, that's Jodie Foster. And all these, just everywhere. So whatever. And you're not supposed to acknowledge them. I mean, there's sort of rules of the road and all that type of thing, when you're in environments like that. But anyway, we're on this deck and we're looking at stars, and it's pitch dark. You can't even see your own hand in front of you. It's that dark. We're looking through a telescope. We're seeing all these beautiful constellations. And on an aside, the astronomer that was there told us that Jodie Foster, like I said a second ago, was there. And that, do you guys remember that movie where she... Contact,
yeah.
Thank you. Where she was going to that the solar system, and she was going to meet with, basically to connect with aliens. I forget what the name of the planet, Sirius.
Sirius.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So he said she was out on this deck. And remember, this movie had been fairly recent when we'd gone there. And it was a beautiful movie. If you guys don't remember that movie, definitely want to watch that this weekend. So she is standing on the deck with a telescope. This is what the astronomer's telling us. And he had to show her where Sirius was in the sky. I just think that's funny.
Ironic. You would have thought she'd kind of catch on to that, given that the entire movie was about that.
Exactly.
Okay.
The entire movie was about getting to this particular solar system, and he had to show her where it was in the sky.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's funny. Anyway, so we're standing out there on the deck, and we're talking to this gal that I thought was, who is the actress?
Oh, gosh. I don't remember.
She has has a deep voice like you do, frankly.
Not Gyllenhaal. Or, I'll think of it in a second.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're talking again. We can't see anything, and so we're having this nice little conversation, and she's very sweet, very nice, and we're looking at stars, and Julie and I are showing her where different things are in the telescope and pointing things out. She's just having a good old time. She'd never even seen like Mars, and she'd never seen Venus.
It was like her first telescope experience. I think.
Yeah, it was awesome, actually.
Yeah, it was.
It was fun sharing that with her.
Yeah.
And even though, frankly, I don't know what she looked like, it was.
We were all in the dark.
I couldn't recognize her now. No. It was her voice, but you ended up exchanging information with her.
She's deep in my contacts somewhere. Yes.
Yeah, and I, by the way, I told you this, Julie, but I ended up Googling her, finding out, and she was the heiress to one of the largest hoteliers in England. So she was actually British, even though she had zero accent, because she'd been schooled in the United States.
She was probably, what would you say, mid-20s, somewhere in there?
Like I said, I didn't see her, but I would only assume.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to Russell.
Sure.
So we're standing there with her, looking out on these beautiful stars and the whole thing. And then she notices, like, she turns around, and there's this, and Russell's tall. And so there was this tall guy wearing this white jacket that looked like it was for someone that was like 10 sizes smaller than him. Remember that white jacket he used to wear all the time? It was like, what is that all about?
Yeah.
Anyway, this is like peak Russell Brand. He was completely involved in all of his misogyny and all of his sexual exploits and his drugs and debauchery. I mean, he was, Old Testament, bad. So he's standing there and he's staring at us. So it turns out those two were dating or something,
Something, I don't know.
Yeah. And he doesn't even say anything, but I turned around and because there was lights in the back of the deck, you could kind of see where he was, and he's kind of a distinctive feature. And we'd seen him the same day earlier, so we knew he was there. And he had this stone cold serial killer look on his face. Yeah. And so we'd been out there talking to his, I guess, friend. And so then they walked into the restaurant. So you have to walk through a restaurant to get to the deck. So we stayed out there for a little bit longer and enjoyed the experience. Started to get cold. So we walked through the restaurant, and then you have to walk through the front door to leave. And he was sitting in the restaurant with her, and he stared at me almost like he wanted to literally skin me alive for no particular reason. So he just sat there and stared at me, and we had no choice but to walk right by him. And he just locked eyes with me the whole time.
No, hey, hello, how's it going? Nothing friendly
Creep
whatsoever.
show, 100%.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's so fascinating to see. And by the way, I think Russell Brand is an incredible talent, just for the record. And I had no ill will towards his freaky behavior. Just sort of, I think, added to his.
It's just made the evening that much more spicy, I guess.
Exactly. Well, I'm telling the story now, almost a couple decades later. So he's now found religion, right? And he's now discovered his faith in God, and he is all the things. And culturally, there's a massive shift that's happening. And it's indicative of other things that people have, I think, grown weary of. And it is the substitutes for God people have grown weary of. COVID, I think, was the last nail. Oh, I just said a word that might get us flagged on YouTube.
Bad.
Okay, so we're not talking about
go down
it.
that road.
But that era, I think, was something of a final straw for a lot of people that maybe were using big government and trust all those types of things. And I have to again be careful because we don't want to get
slope. Yeah.
But yes, and that was the final straw. And people are saying, "Oh my gosh, I had faith in the government. I had faith in all these other things,
and we're let down."
And they were literally using those words, and they were let down. So there's my Russell Brand, Jodie Foster religion story.
Let me bring that all. Let me land the plane a little bit on that. So why Russell Brand? Now you talked a lot about the previous Russell Brand with his, and he talks about this drug addictions and debauchery and all kinds of stuff. And now I've heard him interviewed a few times about the new Russell Brand, that he has put that behind him, and as I don't know whether he says he's reborn or what have you, but one of the things that resonated with me that he said was, I always kind of said, Christianity, the Bible, the teachings, that's all, he said he kind of had that in a certain bucket in his mind of, that's all right for all you guys, but whatever. And then he said, this is him saying, he said, but I never really knew anything about it. I never researched it. I never looked into it. I never really knew what was in the Bible. I never studied it. And now that I have, it's all come together for me.
Well, let me just, so it's almost like a child's reaction to a parent trying to tell the kid to eat their vegetables. Mm-hmm. And the kid doesn't want to do it, again, reflecting on our beautiful 11-year-old daughter, but a kid rejecting it just because the parents are telling the kid to do it.
And maybe they don't like the idea of vegetables.
Or they don't like being told what to do.
Exactly. And now never having tried them or knowing anything about it.
But that's what's probably happening with us culturally.
Yes.
And so we're all sort of growing up and maturing and realizing all the false gods that were out there and all the things that we've been trying to use to substitute for God. All those things are being set aside. And that, in my opinion, is ushering in this new golden era, or leaving us the opportunity to start thinking expansively and with the realization that all the precepts we've had probably for the past 60 years now need to be set aside, and let's get back to the fundamentals of what really makes humanity and really our country, frankly, extraordinary.
Yes, extraordinary and successful, and in a better light. And this whole vibe shift idea towards those more tried and true North Stars. After all, a lot of this stuff has been around for thousands of years. And one might ask, well, what? And you and I listened to a podcast about this morning. They said, well, why is it? How do you explain? Because this is not just Tim and Julie talking. This is statistically backed with things like a Christian podcast rating higher than Joe Rogan's 13 million downloads a podcast podcast, right?
Well, it's
so
even-
what causes that?
It's so much better than that because it's so much more important than you and I just saying that. Because Joe Rogan's been doing podcasts for longer than we have, and we've been
Yes.
doing podcasts arguably since
the beginning of time,
2011.
yeah.
All right, and he's been doing them for as long, and he has as many podcasts, if not more, than we do.
Right.
And so this religious-based one had nowhere near the foundation.
No, they're pretty new, actually.
And now it's past popular culture, it's past NPR, it's past all these other things, and now people wanting to learn about God and how to get reconnected with something that they all fundamentally, intuitively have felt was missing in their lives, and now for whatever reason, they've given themselves permission to really allow themselves to explore that and to embrace what's innate in all of us.
Yes, well said. And I have two thoughts on that. One is we keep on referring to that podcast. It's called The Bible in a Year with, I don't remember his last name, Father Mike. I listened to some of that this morning.
How did you find that originally? Because you've been talking about that on and off for like 6 months.
I think that I got that as a recommendation from another podcast, which is called How to Raise Good Humans. I think that's, about parenting and stuff like that. And I heard it referred to by maybe a couple of other people. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And maybe that came out on the Russell Brand interview where he was talking about actually reading what he had previously written off. So fair, it's funny when you have several things direct you towards a new thought. I think I got it from several places, but it's called A Bible in a Year with Father Mike. One of the things that I like about it is it's not like really heavy, like going to mass and sitting there for 2 or 3 hours and, falling asleep or whatever. It's very approachable. Father Mike is like, a modern guy talking about how you would apply this. So he reads a little bit of scripture and then he says, well, what does this really mean? He helps you understand it. He helps you think about it. So I like that. And also it's like 30 minutes or less. So it's very approachable. I think that's one thing about that. And the other thing with regards to both the new golden era and this vibe shift idea does go back to podcasts. Here's an idea that I think is tied to this. With I don't know if it's a total death or demise of like traditional media. We all know the ratings have gone down and, all of those reasons. And the migration towards podcasts. The difference is that podcasts do not have all of these gatekeepers and filters. And, it's very, like, if you listen to a podcast, it is what it is, right? It's not like...
Can I interject one thing and don't lose your train of thought?
Okay.
Because it's important. We've said that before, but we haven't said why that's true.
Sure.
Because iTunes doesn't have a bunch of checks in place. All the other platforms do. So right now, YouTube is listening to our podcast. They're listening to the words that we say, and they're looking for certain words, and their AI will flag those words. And then they'll just decide whether or not what we are saying in the context in which we are saying it violates their terms of service. iTunes doesn't really do that. The reason it's very fascinating to me how amazing the iTunes platform truly is, because you can't cheat it. You see very, very, very few people go from being popular on YouTube to being popular podcasts. It never happens. Julie and I, our YouTube channel didn't really start taking off until maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. But we got, our podcast, we've done thousands and thousands and thousands of podcasts. So if you look at, for example, the number of people that are able to go, again, I'm going to say it, from being podcasters to popular YouTubers, that's pretty much, I think, a natural extension. If you're good on a podcast, your content's going to find an audience on YouTube. But the YouTube people don't find an audience with podcasting. Now, you ask yourself why that's true, because it is true. It's because a lot of your YouTube audience, the visual audience, is not looking for information that's that drilled down and in depth. And if you ever have, this is kind of a fun experience. If you watch the news, whatever the hell the news is nowadays, it doesn't matter what channel it is, MSNBC, Fox, CNN, whatever it is. If you watch it with your eyes closed and just use your ears, and then you're going to start, it takes sometimes like a minute or two, but you're going to realize how much utter crap it is that they're saying and how much it's just absolute, fling-flammery compared to a really decent podcast. So being able to articulate what you're trying to say in a clear and concise way, verbally, with no ability to lean into, essentially the usual facial mannerisms that all of us rely on in real life face-to-face conversations, The nonverbals, I have no nonverbals with any of you guys right now as I'm talking, and neither does Julie. And you know what that does is it forces us to be really good at trying to convey thoughts and our energy and, hopefully helping all of you. And frankly, this is cathartic for us, this Friday show. But without that, again, taking a really good YouTuber and putting them on a podcast doesn't translate because they have the inability, generally speaking, this is the only conclusion I've come to articulate at the same level. It's vastly harder to start a really good podcast and have a really good audience because most podcasts have like no downloads ever. And I don't even remember the numbers. I haven't looked in probably a year, but they basically get no downloads ever. And then I think a lot of them, unfortunately, are really good potentials. I've listened to podcasts that have no downloads, and some of them are really good, really, really smart historians and things like that. So the moral of the story is what's happening in society is people are realizing that a lot of the stuff that they've been consuming really is just bubblegum. It's just garbage.
Yes, and I think that there is a movement for more people to learn to think for themselves.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this morning as I, again, was listening to something. I think it was on Raising Good Humans.
Let me just finish this one thing. I'm
Sure.
sorry. Because
okay.
there's somebody out there, one person probably that's appreciating the point I almost lost. All right. So on iTunes, if you want to basically get downloads on iTunes, you can't cheat it. So if you if you have a YouTube channel, you can actually, you can market or promote your videos and you can get views. You can get people to subscribe. You can run ads. Google owns YouTube. And, they want you to promote your YouTube channel. And I'll go as far as to say I've talked to people that have huge YouTube channels and they spend a gob of money promoting their channels. They spend tons of money on ads and whatnot. There is no vehicle like that for podcasts. Matter of fact, that's one of the reasons that a lot of people struggle to have a successful podcast is because there are no shortcuts or hacks. Your podcast, like iTunes, will internally promote your podcast based on the feedback, the 5-star reviews, and the number of downloads. So honestly, it's a meritocracy. That's what Apple did with iTunes. Is it really is allowing the cream to rise to the top, and there's no way that someone can shortcut it by just doing a bunch of little, frankly, hacker stuff like you can do on a lot of the other platforms.
Yeah, it's like I think what you're saying is it's kind of a more pure sifting and sorting, and the good ones will survive, and there's not like people saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, and it's not our algorithm. And
why does our podcast get so many downloads every single day? It's because I know why, because I can look at the analytics from iTunes. We don't promote it. We promote it on the podcast itself.
Sure.
But we don't run ads to it. We don't do anything like that. And it's not from the clips and stuff we do on YouTube and all the other socials.
Right.
It's because of word of mouth. This podcast has grown 100% because of the fact that agents share it with other agents.
Well, those are testimonials, right? They're basically podcast testimonials, just like you do in like if you're running a real estate business and your past clients say something nice about you and then they refer that to you. I do like that. It's interesting when I think about stuff that I listen to. Most of it is because of that somebody recommended that. Yep. Maybe a coaching client. Tammy Irby, one of my coaching clients, was giving me some great recommendations on our call the other day, stuff she's listening to and expanding to. But I think that there is an element in this new golden era, in the vibe shift of learning to think for yourself versus the legacy media, which literally was telling people how to think.
Jules, can you think of a single podcast that you listen to on the regular that was not someone didn't recommend it to you? Like if I were to go and look at my podcast that I listen to every day, there's not a single one that I found other than from someone saying you should listen to this.
I probably 90% of them. The only ones I've searched, looking for new stuff before, like I like the 5 good news stories. It's a 5-minute podcast. It's all positive because I look for little snippets that I can listen to on a dog walk, for example. But I would say it's 90% either recommended by somebody that we know and trust or by some podcaster that we listen to regularly. One thing leads to the next. And you can try stuff out and maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But yeah, I think that's good. But let me go back to this thought of, getting away from being told what to think. One of the things that I like about curating what you're listening to, because we're really talking about is taking care of your mindset. We talk about that in our regular podcast quite a bit. And expanding the different directions that you can think in and your experience. and where that comes from. And I think at the top of the podcast, what you said was really important, is getting out of your own hamster wheel of thoughts. And I see this particularly, I think everybody gets into that we did a podcast about getting out of bad habits and thought habits and things like that. But especially some of our listeners that are doing a ton of transactions and they're in it every day. They're having a lot of the same repetitive actions and thoughts. To branch out and listen to something completely out of, say, your real estate wheelhouse. I think that's very cathartic. I think it's very good for you, and it will creep into your life in many different ways. Maybe you go on a listing presentation, and because you listen to something about the Renaissance and they have a picture on the wall that reminds you of that makes that connection that much more important. And I started to talk about...
You're talking about gatekeepers. That's really what you were saying. The people that have been gatekeeping us from information.
Yeah.
The people that we were told that this person is an expert. We were told to listen to this person. And then we conditionally this is what makes me think this is all genuinely part of a golden era. People are not going to be fooled anymore. So when you had somebody show up on Pick Your News channel and they had, you just automatically assumed that person knew what the heck they were talking about.
We were very trusting for a long time.
Well, our generation
was raised to be trusting.
And certainly older.
Yes.
But I think the oldest generation of millennials, the oldest ones, which are just a little bit younger than us, they're the last generation that were raised that way. All the younger people don't even remotely trust. I mean,
Not at all. No.
I bet you people are like, what? Cable news, the hell's that?
How do you even find that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so the younger generation is the one that's going to lead the way, essentially, in the hard reset of all these different forms of media. But that's really what you're talking about. You're talking about the breaking down of the gatekeepers. Yes. People are tired of being told, listen to this, do this, believe that. And you said something else, too, which I thought was interesting. You said, we're all trapped in our own hamster wheels.
Yeah.
I'll go as far as to say that we have been trapped in not hamster wheels of our own making, but we've been trapped in hamster wheels that people have made for us.
Yes. Interestingly, you and I watched the movie again, 1984.
Yeah.
And it was almost chilling I would say probably 5 or 6 times in that movie where it was like, whoa, we got a bit too close to that fairly recently.
And George Orwell wrote that book. What was it? 50s? I think it was the 50s.
I think he wrote it like 1939 or 40, and then somewhere
we researched it. It was right. It was after World War II.
Maybe it was right after. Yeah. Maybe it was 49. Yeah. But so it's not like he would have known all of these things, but some of the chilling stuff about like being told how to think, what to think. What is it called? Thought crimes and things like that. That was creepy. To your point of we were all very trusting for a long time, and to what end, right? Where did that lead us down that path?
So let's take a pivot there, and I want to talk about I heard this morning, and I thought it was very fascinating. Do you know how many countries have a First Amendment? Anything even remotely resembling free speech?
I don't know. Probably not very many.
It'd be none, except the United States.
Wow.
Right. So if you look, for example, what happens when and how many of them have a Second Amendment, the right to bear arms?
I don't know. Maybe a handful.
Why is it the First Amendment, the free speech, and the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms?
To protect yourself from
what?
Probably from the government.
From
tyranny.
Tyranny. That's right.
To take care of yourself.
And so look, isn't that interesting that there's a human desire for free speech? And so being able to say what we think, and look what happens when all of a sudden that starts to get encroached upon, let alone taken away. Is there is, at least in the United States, but I think frankly globally, there's definitely, again, part of the golden age, there's definitely a wholesale rejection of people being told what to think and what to do. And podcasts are the great unbridled threat to the aristocracy of the thought police. Yeah. And I think that's really fascinating.
I think that's a huge part of the new golden era.
Me too.
I really do. You can see how it affected the election and many other things. Just that I guess it does come down to freedom of speech, freedom of thought. It's an interesting balance to take after that. You want to have freedom of speech, but you also want to have, some checks and balances.
People should be allowed to say dumb things.
They should be. This is how we work out thoughts.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, so let me bring you back to part of what I hope in this golden era, in the vibe shift, however we want to be calling that. I think that we're going to get to better discourse between people. I was listening to something about how to teach kids to have their moral compass without coming off as morally superior, and how to like have that conversation. And one of the things they said was to start out with just flat out communication, to have a conversation without automatically judging and saying, oh, well, you don't believe what I believe, so you must be bad. And then so that it spells an acronym, I think. C is communication, I is invite discussion. Don't just summarily reject.
Can I talk about Taylor Swift real quick?
1 second. And then
You're
the
going
V is verify. Now, verify does not mean agree with your maybe potentially conflicting belief. I'm verifying that you have that belief and that there must be something behind that. Now, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe you just believe that because somebody told you to. But that, if you remember the acronym CIV, as in civility, right, of discussion, because that's how things used to be. When, like, go back to how the country was founded. They had discussions. They talked to each other. They looked at different ideas, right? It wasn't just, well, it's my way or the highway. You're either on the right or you're on the left, or you're believing this or believing that. So you communicate first. You invite and investigate. That's the I. So you actually get to know, well, why is it you think that, right? And then you verify. Verify is not the same as agreeing with. It's verifying that you must have that belief for some reason. It must come from somewhere. I want to understand that more. That's why you get back to communication.
Well, so considering you have no notes, you just pulled that out of your head. That's pretty impressive. So
I'm
nice
trying.
job
I'm
there.
working on
so
this
you're
stuff,
better at
right?
winging it. Well, I was going to talk.
I've also had extra coffee this morning.
I wasn't trying to be rude to Julie by bringing up Taylor Swift, because I know what got her on that journey of learning that stuff in particular.
Yeah.
And here's what it was. It's because our daughter does not like Taylor Swift, and she's 11, and she has never liked Taylor Swift. And the reason that Zoe doesn't like Taylor Swift is because Zoe took the time to read the lyrics of Taylor Swift's songs. And
especially the latest stuff. Yeah.
Taylor Swift's songs are not in alignment with the Catholic upbringing that Zoe's had. Zoe went when she was very young. She went to when we lived in Texas. You know, she went to a very traditional, nuns walking around and the whole habits, the whole
Mass
thing.
on Friday.
Exactly, Mass on Friday. And that fundamental software that was loaded into her head is forever there, which is spectacular. And so all of her friends were becoming Swifties, and they were pulling her into this whole Taylor Swift thing. And Zoe actually lost some friends because she did take a little bit of I don't even know, I'm using the word self-righteous pops into my head, but I'm not sure really what
on a kid level.
She didn't know how to express herself to them why she didn't like Taylor Swift, other than basically to try to make those girls feel like they were wrong for liking Taylor Swift. And the problem was, and Zoe didn't realize this until, again, she'd lost some friends, is that a lot of those girls liked Taylor Swift because it was an experience they were sharing with their moms. And
they like to sing the songs on the way to school and things.
Right.
So really what happened with Zoe is she lacked perspective on that. She didn't do the C part of the CIV, right? She didn't communicate. She communicated from her perspective. I don't like Taylor Swift because I think she just sings about breakup songs all the time and they all sound the same.
And then Zoe's like, don't you think that maybe the problem should be that you should be thinking about why you're breaking up? I mean, she has this whole thing.
She could go into probably a sermon about it.
She could have a talk show on all the things that she's like little Dr. Phil and all the things that Taylor Swift is.
And by the way, she came to all this on her own. This was not in any way fed to her. I think Taylor Swift has some good songs. I've never had discussion one with her about it. It's just that they spend 7 or 8 hours a day at school and this stuff comes up, But so what we're trying to teach her, and I think what hopefully we all as adults are learning, is there is a way to have discussion where you can have differing opinions, and that does not make the other person wrong or bad or necessarily evil, with some exceptions. Obviously, there's evil in the world.
This is such a good point, Julie. Very good.
But you can have, like, I remember when we went to the AP, our alternative high school, we had some great, like, Science and Society was a great class where we could have actual discussions about real things and take them apart and put them back together again and feel like you walked away with a greater understanding of something and still have differing opinions on something.
Do you understand why it's important to have that discourse about taking something apart and putting it back together again? Do you know why intellectually and spiritually why that's important in the learning process?
Well, talk about that.
Because you make the knowledge yours, and it's not
you own it more.
It's not dogmatic. So it's like when
I'm totally with you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not.
it is part of what makes you tick, and it gives you confidence, and it gives you identity of who you are. And I see, and we'll stop talking about Zoe in a second, but
No, we won't.
You know, we had an interesting discussion. She said that, they're all kind of pre-teeny right now, and they're like old enough to have more intellectual thoughts, and they're studying more interesting things, but they also are mostly kid and don't process things like an adult, right? So they're in an interesting little developmental stage.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's really interesting to watch. And what she said was, she was talking about how she's feeling confident in who she is. And she sees some of her friends, and she's got other, there's a lot of really strong
use
kids.
real words. You haven't told me this. So what did she say to you?
She feels like, I think part of it went back to the Taylor Swift conversation, that she feels confident in her beliefs. Like she'll.
Sweetie.
Let me give you an example.
Mama, and act like it was Zoe talking to you. I want to actually hear the real words. What did she say to you?
She said some of her friends. Well, she was talking about using swear words, and so she gets into it with them a little bit. Like she'll say things like, "I understand why sometimes swear words happen, like when you're driving, Mama," or something like that. I'm like, hopefully this doesn't go too far. But she said, but I don't think that should be something that a kid really uses normally. And I said, are you sure about that? And she said, well, different families have different rules, but I feel like that's a rule that I like. That's for me. Like she's putting her little filters
So
together.
we told her not to swear, but she's now making it her own because she thought through it and why she doesn't want to use certain words.
She doesn't like it. She doesn't. She thinks it's only, in certain situations, stuff like that.
She had to have her own life experience, test things out, look to see these other kids that she knows, to see what essentially, and put it in context. It wasn't just Zoe dogmatically don't swear. Zoe's, okay, I'm not going to swear because I don't want to get in trouble with Dad.
Right.
But at the same time, she now has sort of gone around the bend and now made that part of herself. Maybe we planted the seed, but then it actually became who she was. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's finding, to your point, well, you asked, why is it important to take something and take it apart and put it back together again? I think on one level, it's a deeper understanding, so you know even what you're talking about. Like, it does drive me crazy when somebody is super opinionated, but doesn't really have any facting behind it. Like they're just like super judging you off the bat.
There's a difference,
but they do it with confidence. That makes me insane.
There's a difference between sounding like confidence and competent, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
There's a huge difference between confidence. Like if you go and listen to a lot of these blowhards, on the different platforms, and they talk with all this energy and enthusiasm, you don't listen to the words that they're saying. You feed off their energy and enthusiasm because you think, your brain thinks that person could only speak so, with so much energy and enthusiasm. Yeah, exactly. Vitriol, right? Whatever it is. Mm-hmm. If they knew what they were talking about. If they absolutely positively were somebody I had to listen to. After all, something in my brain thinks that's what leaders sound like. I mean, harken back to Hitler and his famous speeches. I know that's what you were thinking.
Yeah.
And so, there's something that triggers a behavior in all of us when you're listening to someone wave their hands around and talk with all this. But the truth is there's a big difference between, speaking confidently, faking it, acting, and being competent about whatever the hell they're talking about.
But here's the thing. As I said a second ago, I can get triggered by that when somebody is like over the top.
In our space.
Especially in our space, okay? But I have to have some kind of civility, right? Some communication, and catch myself and say, okay, well, that's interesting. Why do you think that? That's the bridge that we've gotten away from.
And then not try to spin it around on them and put them in a corner.
And I'm not asking that just so that I can be right and you can be wrong. I have to be genuinely, intellectually, spiritually, mentally, emotionally invested in finding out maybe there is something. Why is it that you think that way? And if you come up dry, you have nothing. It's because of, or you say something that's just not true, okay? Then you can maybe have a discussion. Well, I understand why you believe that, but would you be surprised to find out that actually fill in the blank? Or maybe this is something new to me, and maybe that changes how I think. We have to have this back and forth again that we've all gotten severely away from.
Well, I turned you on to Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, I like how he does it, actually.
He does. He's
very good at that.
He doesn't try to make the person wrong. He actually, I think, is a little bit more diplomatic than even.
Yeah, he'll say, "Tell me more about that."
Than even like Ben Shapiro.
Quite a bit more.
Ben Shapiro seems to just like seems to like gut people like a fish verbally.
Right.
He's so good at it. It's almost a little gratuitous. He's
a bit more aggressive about it.
Yeah, but he's almost what's the word
maybe a little self-righteous on it sometimes.
Yeah. But Charlie Kirk, if you guys aren't listening to his podcast, you should. So in any event, he's, I think, very good when he's debating somebody a lot about their Marxist perspectives. Oh, let's talk about that in a second too. About their Marxist perspectives you guys can call it socialism, you guys can call it whatever you want to.
Yeah.
But and he circles people back around. And he does it in a very respectful and I say loving and godlike way.
Yes, I would agree with that. And if you haven't listened to Charlie Kirk, he's I don't know, he does a lot of shorter podcasts throughout the day. And then I don't know what his regular schedule is, but he's a pretty prolific poster. What I like, excuse me, about what he does, I don't know how old he is, probably 30
Early
or less.
30s.
Early 30s. He goes to college campuses and engages and tries to have those
The
discussions.
most liberal college campuses.
Yeah, but he invites. I like how he'll be maybe interviewing somebody from stage, and then he'll open up to questions, and he asks for people who perhaps disagree with him to come up first in line, so that he can take their question, or maybe they have a question for him or a comment, and then he engages with them. And it can be very interesting. I mean, I've learned a lot from both sides of how he thinks.
So do you mind if we switch?
Nope.
Okay.
Fire away.
Again, this is how Julie and I spend our non-real estate time and our brains. So I was listening to another interview, again, podcast, and this is with someone you mentioned earlier, Mel Gibson.
Oh yeah.
And Mel said, and I heard some other people parrot this, and you and I talked about it. It said almost this. What he said is that the fires in California and the lack of the ability to put them out was almost seemingly intentional, almost like they're trying to run people out of California. And I thought to myself, like my brain was like, that can't be true.
Scooby-Doo, huh?
Yeah, exactly. You run people out of California, there's less, people living there, there's fewer families.
Yeah, why would that be?
There's less tax base. It made no sense to me, especially some of the wealthiest, most productive people that, and that's what Pacific Palisades and, did I tell you I got an email and a bunch of videos from Ben Salem?
No, I have been interested to hear from him.
He sent me a bunch this morning. I'll show you.
Yeah.
And it is apocalyptic.
Wow.
That's the only way of describing it, because that's his real estate market. And that's in his own neighborhood. It was on fire.
Is he okay? I hope he's
fine.
okay.
He's
Good.
fine. But he had to run off with gun in hand, looters in his neighborhood.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody else left. There was a couple neighbors, the HOA president, and some local police that stuck
Wow.
around, and then he stayed there to protect his house, and he did, and he was completely
That's
prepared.
unbelievable.
Yeah, but he the videos are unbelievable. And then he walked around. The things he sent me were just little iPhone. But his neighborhood is it's not Pacific Palisades, but it's one of those. It's areas where like Kardashians live and all
Yeah.
that. It just is unreal. It's surreal. And he showed he sent me videos that were taken during the fires.
Yeah.
And the fires were like right across the street, right down the street, houses burning.
And very fast moving too. I saw some of them. I saw somebody's Ring camera that I think in the space of, it was 32 minutes from when they saw a spark to it coming down the mountainside, and
that's what he said
in their neighborhood.
He said
the winds.
He said that there was no fires in his neighborhood. He said he was outside and he started getting hit by these big ash balls, and they were completely out. He said they were not just pieces of ash. He said they were almost like little snowballs, basically. And he said they just started coming out of nowhere. He said he ran to his house and he said, "Christy, we've got to go," is his wife. And they've got little kids, and she's like, he goes, "The fire is here." She didn't believe it. And they went back and forth according to this audio he sent me. And she had to go on her own little sojourn up the street, and she came back in a full panic because she realized the entire street and the neighborhood was on fire.
Wow.
And just moments before it hadn't been. And so they all rushed out and left, and his house was spared because Ben had built around his property essentially an irrigation system that started on his roof.
Wow.
And he showed me pictures of it. His whole house looked like a waterfall. And he had a backup generator to run the pumps. So what he was doing was getting the water. This is Ben. He was running pumps from I think he was either running, I don't know what was fueling the generator, doesn't matter, draining his pool to put water all over his property.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Okay, so let me just hover there for a second at a little coaching moment, because at the beginning of this week we did a
Proper previous
podcast
planning.
about the fires and preparation and how to do things. And the first point was take care of yourself and your family first. Put your own mask on first. Now, so proper previous planning prevents pitifully poor performance. That's the 7 Ps. Ben is a fantastic example of that. Mm-hmm. And now Ben can say, thank you, past Ben, for doing what perhaps some of his neighbors might have thought was a little bit of crazy stuff in preparation.
Dude, he had the whole thing MacGyvered. He showed me these videos.
That's awesome.
He had all these garden hose all around the property. He had special, I don't know how to describe them, but rods that he'd created, because he's an inventor, right?
Yeah.
He's like an amateur inventor. That's what he does as a hobby. He's actually patented a lot of things.
I didn't know that.
So he had these little mechanisms. Yeah. He had, remember how those little things you put over your earbuds and stuff? They were supposed to stop.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he had these devices to stick the hoses up on the gutters and on the roof and this whole thing.
That's awesome.
Anyway, it was total MacGyver.
Yes, but so back to the Mel Gibson thing.
Okay, so Mel was insinuating, and I heard other people pick up on it, that it was by design that they weren't putting the fires out, or at least they're ill-prepared. To which I still, as I say, you guys can hear me stammering because I can't possibly imagine that's true. It's just absolutely so evil to think that might be true. So, okay, whatever. I just let it go. Julie and I just thought, well, Mel must be having a Mel moment. So then I heard somebody else better explain it, and it was on Tucker Carlson's podcast, I think. And the guy they were talking about the history of Marxism and Karl Marx and all the rest of it. And again, I knew some of this. I did not know anywhere near the amount that I learned on that podcast. It's the one I told you should listen to.
Yes.
Did you listen to that
this
one
weekend?
Yet? Okay. Yeah.
It's in my queue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Was it Tucker?
Yeah, it was Tucker.
Okay, good. So it's maybe 2 or 3 shows ago.
I can't remember the name of the guy who was interviewing, but it was Tucker.
You guys should definitely listen to that one. So he walked through the whole history of Marxism, but the thing that really just rocked my world was when they started talking about the fact that in essence, and this so made sense, is the reason it was so, I think, shocking to me, is that, so when Julie and I were growing up, and you guys, the same thing, all of our experiences, everyone has sort of had a taint on successful people. There's a bit of a belief culturally amongst a lot of people, and it's become normalized that rich people are rich because they, essentially took advantage of poor people. That look what's happening with the whole belief that a CEO is only in their position because of the fact that they have all these other people that are. It's the whole concept behind, I think, a lot of the rationalization behind unions and all this type of thing. So the belief is that rich people are only rich because they steal from the poor people, because they figured out different ways to take advantage of other, and you guys can see this has manifested itself throughout time in different religions.
True.
A lot of the issues the Jews have been experiencing since forever, all these types of things. And so he started explaining how in Marx's doctrine, the idea is that rich people, obviously, they're big believers in redistribution. And you heard Bernie Sanders saying the same thing recently, like yesterday. And Joe Biden on his speech on the way out of his closing speech as president or whatever it is, he was saying the same thing. These oligarchs and all the rest of it. All the while, he gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to George Soros, who's arguably one of the biggest oligarchs on planet Earth ever. Anyway, I digress. And so we're talking about the Marxist theory that rich people, there should not be such a discernible, significant difference in the wealth that's held by fewer people. And that is somehow evil, or that's somehow something that society should proactively work to take away. And who should be in charge of that, my dear listener? The government, of course. So the government should have all the power, not certainly the oligarchs to listen to Bernie, or certainly normal voters. The government should be deciding. Going back to the George Orwell 1984 book and movie, and you guys should watch or read that ASAP. The government should be deciding who gets to say what the beliefs are, what the religion is. By the way, in 1984 there was no religion. Very similar, if not the exact same, as communism. In communist countries there is no religion. At least there's no, government religion. It's fringe to be religious in most communist countries. So what's going on with all of that? What's going on with maybe what is going on in California? That there was no real effort. I don't believe this, by the way, but I'm just saying conceptually it's interesting. What if there is essentially a spin up of these Marxist beliefs that people wouldn't even identify? I don't believe, maybe it's someone saying as they listen, look, Tim, the fact is that if someone has a lot of money and, somehow they got that by taking advantage of other people. Do you believe that in any way? Well, Julie was just saying, why don't you test that precept? Maybe the reason that somebody has a lot of money, maybe the reason that Elon Musk is as wealthy as he is simply because he's created more value for humanity than, the next, billion, however many people. Look what he's done. Look at all he's created. Don't you think there should be just reward? And who decides how much he should be rewarded for that? Bernie actually goes as far as to say that nobody should have a net worth more than even $1 billion. Why $1 billion, my dear friend Bernie? Why not make it 1 million? Why not make it 10 million? Why not make it 100,000? And all the excess money that people earn should go to the government so all of you guys can decide who gets what. To what end? So you can be the ultimate, arbiters of truth. Ultimate arbiters of,
well,
power.
we got to have a level playing field.
And so you literally can then control what people think and frankly vote for. If voting in that scenario, worst case would even matter. It wouldn't, of course, because you can control whether they work. You can control whether they get a house. Like in communist, we have friends, some of you do too, who actually grew up in communist countries. Mm-hmm. And there was no meritocracy. There was no climbing the ladder. You could have the most talents and ambition, and it wouldn't matter because you weren't essentially part of the machine. So you could literally never have a house, never have a car, never have opportunities to travel, all these types of things. That's the antithesis of what America is all about. And really, fundamentally, if we start having these conversations, like what hopefully we're having now with all of you, and Julie and I have been talking about this a lot, if we're willing to have those hard conversations that we might, run the risk of offending even some people we love and, friends, then we can get to the other side of that. Why do you believe what you believe about wealthy people? Why do you believe what you believe about some of the other thoughts that you have? Where do those thoughts come from? From your life experience, does it really make sense? Does the person who, has a lot of money, just staying on that as an example, can you think of examples where that person, is Elon Musk really taking advantage of people, giving away Starlink to everybody in LA right now to basically make it so people have internet connections? All these thoughts. So, Julie?
Yeah. Well, it gets back to investigating why it is that you believe what you believe. And why is it that somebody you're talking to believes what they believe? And I hope that this movement towards investigating and thinking for yourselves brings us a lot more fruitful conversations and gets, one of the tenets of the golden era was peace. That's not just not being at war with other countries. It's not being at war with each other. And maybe that sounds a little too kumbaya, but I think that that's an important piece of moving forward. One of the things that I wanted to monitor of this, hopefully golden era or vibe shift, is I hope that makes its way to college campuses because that was a great purveyor of some of the problems that we had. So I think that's where, some of my future investigation will go.
You guys, if you want to, follow the breadcrumbs, I just put into ChatGPT about Marxist beliefs, and there's obviously ChatGPT is, going to churn out all kinds of interesting information. It's still churning it out as I'm reading it. You guys should definitely go and do that yourself, and then check yourself against what you read about what you believe to be true. And honestly, you're going to be shocked. I wish I would have, when I look back, and I certainly look back to how you and I were raised, which was during Ronald Reagan's era. Mm-hmm. But we did go to a school that was largely old hippies, if we're being honest.
A lot of our teachers were,
being run by old hippies.
Yeah.
And they absolutely, without being so overt as people are now, were definitely on the socialistic, Marxist leanings of things.
Probably, yeah.
And the way that they were essentially trying to teach us different things.
Sure.
And because our core beliefs weren't like that.
Yep.
In that school, you and I were outliers. Mm-hmm. In life, I think we've been outliers.
Yeah.
I remember when you and I started being successful in real estate, I tell this story, and this is, it used to make me emotional, doesn't so much anymore. But in our first year, hey, we're making it about real estate.
Landing the plane.
In our first year, Julie and I have been married for 34 years this year. We were high school sweethearts. And we essentially, when we were done with college, or college was done with us, and our first year selling real estate, we did our first transaction when we were 23. And we sold over 100 homes. And it was like 103 or something like that.
That first full year you're talking
including
about.
pendings. Yeah, our first full year. And so we had made, and remember, this was back in the 90s. And so we had made, and remember our age, it was over $300,000. Our average sale price obviously wasn't very high, but we did over 100 units. The average commission was only $3,000. And after that, we sold real estate for nearly 10 years, and we ramped our average sale price up to closer to like 850 or 900. Again, put it in context, that would probably be equivalent to 2 or 3 million per house now. So after we had the initial success selling real estate, and we always increased the number of homes and didn't always increase the net we made from selling those homes, but that's, again, another story for another day. But I remember we bought a slightly used what year was it? It was a 1996 or 97 BMW M3 four-door.
Its name was Cosmo.
And we named it Cosmo because it was Cosmo Black. And
I loved that car, by the way.
We did. I look on every day on Bring a Trailer for one to show up again. Anyway, so we bought this thing, we leased it, and I remember, my dad was a big car nerd, but my dad definitely was, and I didn't really realize this until I've grown older, he definitely was a little bit more Marxist, socialistic leaning in the way that I was raised, and the way that the things that he was fascinated by. He worked basically for most of his life for the government. And no, I would say certainly he was in the Army. He worked as an engineer for some of the defense industry. There is strong reason to believe that he worked for a while for the CIA, frankly, and some of the things I found. But anyway, all that aside, so Julie and I, we earned the money. We bought this BMW. He wasn't, frankly, we had just been so busy the previous year. We just kept our head down. We didn't even stop to celebrate our little victories, other than the fact that we knew that we were finally making real money. We paid off our student loans, We'd sort of broken away from I think the caste that we were born into. You were supposed to be a school teacher, and I was supposed to be, I don't even know what. And so we now found ourselves on a totally different trajectory from this first year. And all we did really is, we went after for sale by owners. We called expireds.
Lots of open houses.
Lots of open houses.
We worked our tails off.
We did. And we didn't know what we were doing. We obviously were successful, but it was less from talent and more from energy and enthusiasm and just a desire not to fail, I think.
100%.
Yeah. So we bought this car. We pulled it into the driveway, and I remember knocking on the door of their house, and my dad opened the door. He saw the car. My mom was right behind him. He saw the car, and then he took a look at it, and then he slams the door, walks back in the house, and he literally didn't talk to me for a year. I
remember that. Yep.
It was so weird. He
weird.
wouldn't talk to me on the phone. He wouldn't meet with me. He wouldn't talk with me. And now what I didn't tell you was my dad had, unfortunately, a lot of late in life business cycle failures. And at that point, and I, maybe I should have been more sensitive to this, but I wanted my dad to be proud of me. He was suffering what really would only be described as a meaningful downswing in his own economic life. And he never recovered, frankly. He had a business fail. And the business never came back. He never formed any other business, and it was just sort of a slippery slope down from there. But anyway, so I showed him this car. He wanted nothing to do with it, and I could not resolve why he'd acted that way. Why did he act that way towards me? Why was that his reaction? Wouldn't he have just at least shown a little bit of a congratulatory approach? And so why do you think, listeners, why do you think he took that approach? What was his reasoning behind that? Because he couldn't figure out in his brain, it didn't make sense that his son was able to do something like that at our age. It didn't make sense that, Tim and Julie were all of a sudden becoming these different people that no one could quite wrap their minds around, especially in how they'd seen us. I don't know how else to explain it. Can you help me out here?
Yeah, I think it's that. And we were a lot younger then, probably we could.
We were a lot younger then.
Who in their 20s even really thinks, I wonder how that's going to be perceived?
Nope.
In retrospect, we could have, but I think it's probably unrealistic to expect that of.
Well, when you're in your 20s, you still want approval from your parents.
Absolutely. And I think that he must have been triggered by, and I don't think he even would put that into words, like subconsciously, that it wasn't the recognition and approval that you were looking for. It was somehow like showing off or something like that.
Well, so my mom later told me, and this is after he passed away.
Yeah.
Okay. My mom later told me, I asked her about that, and she said, because he was jealous.
But that's what it comes down to.
That's what it comes down to.
And it's probably started as a very subconscious emotional thing, thus the closing the door on.
But he used to say things when I was growing up. He used to literally say the types of Marxist things that I was dropping earlier about essentially rich people are rich because they took them from other people.
Yeah.
And remember, he had a background working for the government. Your parents, to some level, because they were both teachers, had similar leanings.
Yeah.
But none of them would
Not to the extremity that we see today, though.
No, certainly. But neither my father nor your parents would have ever even given you any suggestion that they had Marxist beliefs.
No, well, they wouldn't have called it that, but
they wouldn't have called. They would have called it. Well, your parents are part of a union, and all these things. But they wouldn't have realized the fun where those. Okay, so this is the end. This is the pendulum that I think is. And so when you and I were, in our formidable years, that was what was taught to us is how to believe like that. And then when you and I broke free of that and really did our own thing. Our whole familial support structure, certainly lesser from your parents than mine, and our friends, everyone rejected us. There was not a single person that we took along with us on that journey when you and I basically, and we weren't walking around being boastful and putting it in people's faces or anything like that. And it was new territory for us, trust me.
Yeah.
And now, and obviously we compounded it from there, and we really haven't slowed down, and nor do we plan on slowing down. But it was interesting, and that I never was able to put all these thoughts together until the other day. This is where I'm kind of circling around about this. Why they thought the way they did, and listening to that Tucker Carlson podcast and realizing the history of
following
Karl Marx,
the breadcrumbs back.
Following the breadcrumbs back. For me, that was the closing of a loop that's been open in my mind for 30 years.
Yeah, it definitely merits
studying
and discovery, and I want to read. I want to listen to that as
but
well.
That Karl Marx crept into American culture starting after World War II.
Yes.
And it started by being very pervasive. A lot of people believe that it was literally Russia that was essentially having mostly
Influence.
from colleges
Yeah.
were teaching these Marxist things because they know ultimately it was the antithesis of a capitalist democracy.
Yes. And now here's what's interesting. I think if you go ahead.
Why would they want? Why would they not want a capitalist democracy to thrive? Watch the movie or read the book 1984. It's because if people know, it's the reason that North Korea has a complete blockout and no one in North Korea has any clue what's going on in the rest of the world. It's because when people realize that the dogma that's coming from big government is a bunch of bullshit, then what's going to happen is they're going to start demanding the Arab Spring. You guys remember that? But that's what's going to happen is people are going to summarily reject the dogmatic approach, think this, believe this, live this life. Tim and Julie, you're supposed to be an elementary school teacher. Tim, you're supposed to be a mail carrier. You're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that. Do not break free of these types of castes. But as soon as you do, and if you do that on a grand scale, and this is what podcasts I think are bringing societally right now, it's exposing people unfiltered to different ways of thinking, and that sort of those Marxist ideals or those Marxist beliefs that have perpetuated our society in more meaningful ways than we possibly can recognize. And now we're starting to say, oh my gosh, now I kind of understand.
Yes. Well, think about how it's gotten into people's thought patterns without them even realizing it. Because most people wouldn't say, well, gosh, I didn't know I was a Marxist. Because they haven't studied it, but the thoughts they come in different ways, different flavors. For example, have you ever heard anybody say, I'm not in it for the money? That's related, right? I mean, even when we do goal setting with agents, well, I don't sell real estate for the money. That's kind of rejecting capitalism, and that must be bad. And I don't want to come off as a rich person.
They don't want to be judged.
I don't want to be judged like that. I don't do it for the money, right? I think it also comes out when people don't want to be competitive because winning makes them feel like it's not fair.
Denying competition is
Right.
definitely part and parcel.
That's my point.
Because it's a communal approach
Yes.
where everyone's supposed to get their fair share. And that's the reason Julie and I intentionally say we want you to have, you're more than your fair share. We teach you guys to win. But people have absolutely, in some cases, taken to our coaching, they've taken a adversarial stance because we use words like competition, because we want you to win, because when it comes to taking a listing, there's only one agent that's going to get the contract signed. And again, when we sold real estate and you and I were going after expireds and we were doing all the other things we did, we definitely pissed people off because a lot of people in the real estate industry, after all, the whole premise of real estate is sharing commission, sharing this and sharing the other thing. And when we would go to Howard Brinton events and different events, the idea that you walk in there with your best ideas and you're supposed to share them with everyone else, including your competitors. What? No, that's not how real business works.
Hey, in life, you have to win. There's so many places where winning is baked into being human, right? I mean, even Howard, he used to tell the story about evidence that you're meant to win is that the sperm was successful and you exist.
Okay, now that's way out of context. You might want to put that into tell the whole story. You said it.
I don't even remember the whole story other than the context of.
No, the context, Julie.
It had to compete against a million other sperm for you to exist.
Exactly. There you go.
Right? I mean, just on a basic humanity level.
I want you to play what you said back, and I want you to not include the secondary explanation part.
Yeah,
if someone is just listening to it cold. And
I hope they didn't fast forward to that
with
point.
what you just said.
I know.
That's funny.
But it's true, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you are meant to win. Everything you do in life, you were meant to win. And so you were talking about Marxist
but that's
beliefs,
how God
right?
designed us.
That's my point. Yes.
Yeah, it's not just physiologically.
Well, look at when you plant a bunch of seeds. Do they all grow? Do
Nope.
they all survive? Or do some of them crowd each other out and the strong survive? This is the way of life.
Well, it's like this whole, again, it's very, sorry to harp on this, guys, but this whole idea that, we have mass overpopulation, there's not enough ability to feed everyone, and how there needs to be fewer humans. Have you guys heard people actually talking about, essentially I don't even know what to say. The word genocide popped in my mind. But when you hear some of these far left people talk, and they actually believe should be some form of calling, as in CULL, calling of humans because there's overpopulation.
Well, look what happened in China with not being allowed to have girls. They have
Exactly.
an entire generation that's going to age out, and they actually have what is it called? The replacement theory of replacing yourself. That's not happening.
What if
and they
that's
have a
not-
missing generation?
But you guys realize that's the antithesis of, what God says? Do you realize that's the antithesis of what all of us have experienced on this planet? If it's true, if they're right, and there's too many people on planet Earth, well, then what's going to exactly happen with all, like, if you think how much land in the United States is unsettled, for example.
Most of it, actually.
Most of it, right. And if you look at our ability to create new things, the reason that new things are created is because there's demand. And so as more humans are born and more humans need places to live, and there's more humans that need food, what happens is the humans figure out a way to take care of those more humans, as we've always done since Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Don't you think?
Literally, okay. So literally since
boy.
Adam and Eve, because, and I am no biblical scholar, I'm studying it, so I'm going to screw this up a little bit. Because Zoe and I just re-listened to this morning. When God created Adam and Eve in the 7 days in the whole Genesis, right? He literally said, go forth, populate the earth, and dominate the earth, that he made the earth for man and woman.
Yeah. There you
So
go.
there you are.
And then, so the people that are saying, well, we have too many people, there's not enough food, there's not enough water. Do you notice, guys, how the anti-spiritual people always are closely tied to the scarcity mindset? Like, they're always saying there's not enough. There's not enough.
And it's not fair.
But isn't that fascinating? Have you thought about that, Julie?
So that gets...
It's because they have lack of faith.
Yes, lack of faith, and it also comes back to the control of things, right?
Right. So if there's lack, that means there needs to be some sort of, and they don't believe in God.
Right.
And so the God's, that's generally, Marxist socialist types do not believe in God. So if that's true, or they might say they believe in God, but they don't actually live by biblical teachings. And if that's how they actually live, and then they think the government is supposed to solve the self-created problems, or the perceived problems. And you see that happening in politics. But that too is getting summarily rejected.
And that's handing over control. And when you hand over control, you can be manipulated. So is there really a lack of food, or is there just lack of efficiency of people having access to food? And who's in control of all of that?
Well, is there a lack? Is there government trying to stymie the... Okay, so let's look at energy, just as a for example, and then
Sure.
I've got to round the bend because I got to get in a
Yep.
Zoom. All right, so if you look at energy, in the United States, so we don't actually harvest our own, to use a word, we don't harvest our own natural resources in the United States because after all, coal is dirty. Okay, so what do we end up doing? We end up getting our energy from foreign countries. Do you think who does energy cultivation, let's say, cleaner than the United States? Nobody on planet Earth does. That's the answer. So if you're saying, well, we get all of our energy, we're getting our oil from all these different foreign countries. Well, guess what they're doing? They're polluting the atmosphere, and they're creating all the nastiness that we're all pridefully walking around saying that we don't create because we don't, mine and all the rest of it here in the United States.
Well, in other words, the energy is being created,
Right.
not by us, and in a less clean way.
Exactly. A less clean way, certainly a less humane way. And so we're all like, oh, we're superior to all these other societies, and because we don't, destroy our natural resources and all the rest of it. Well, they're destroying theirs, and the ramifications or the byproduct of the destruction of their natural resources is just as a harmful effect on essentially the environment as if we've done it ourselves.
Yeah.
So the whole idea that, we're somehow better than, say, for example, China when it comes to coal is a bunch of crap. It's so if we're the energy that we have, why is it then, what is it at the heart of not allowing America to use its God-given natural resources? It creates scarcity. It creates, we have to solve this problem. We can't obviously go to all the massive amounts of natural gas and oil that we have that we could essentially be exploiting for our own benefit that, is under our own ground. So that means we have to create all these alternative things. Well, hell, we're going to create electric cars. Where do electric cars get their energy from? Well, you plug what are you talking about, Tim? I plug my car into my garage and I'm good to go. Where does the energy come that's going to your house, that's going to your car, that's electrifying your car? Coal.
Right.
What?
Okay, so stay on that thought for a second. Kind of related to energy, I think. But has anybody answered, speaking of natural resources, why were the reservoirs in California empty? They had billions of water capacity.
Well, it's the one in particular.
Why was that?
The one in particular that was empty was the one that was exactly there for the sole purpose of providing potable water.
Potable water, yeah.
Okay.
Non-drinkable water.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
This reservoir, I don't think they call it a reservoir. In California, they have a much more interesting name for it.
Yeah.
Let's call it reservoir. That was not only used to, obviously, it was drinking water.
Filtration,
it was in this big open basin.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I researched this.
Okay.
It was in this big open basin.
Uh-huh.
And this big open basin had, it was leaking or something. And so they drained it
Okay.
to fix this problem that was in this particular
makes sense.
basin. Yeah, they did.
Okay.
And then they hadn't filled it back up. And that timing of it obviously was atrocious.
Okay.
And that's supposedly the reason that they ran out of water. But it was
Gotcha.
indeed empty. And it was indeed in this particular area.
Okay.
But so this is the reason I'm saying ultimately, if you get into the politics of things,
Right.
it just is sort of like a black hole of energy. So you got to kind of elevate your thinking beyond that. Otherwise, you're
Right.
going to end up, oh, Gavin Newsom is at this or Gavin Newsom is at that. Don't get stuck there. That's where they want you to be. They want you to be mired in the political things because then you're not thinking about these grander ideas that hopefully we're helping you guys to connect with.
Yes, well, very well said. So I think probably that's the pod.
Yeah.
Because we both have, I think we're on a mutual Zoom coming up for
Yes.
our new things that we're working on. And then I have a couple of coaching calls this afternoon, and we still have to work out. So.
Yes, we do. So listen, guys, this is our Friday show, and I want you to...
Thanks for sticking it out to the end with us, guys.
Exactly. Give us some ideas of what you want us to talk about in the future. Let us know, more of this, less of that. Give us some concepts. If you guys are following any breadcrumbs in your own, education, and as you you try to expand your own thinking and be more objective and less, a little bit, I think less dogmatic in your approach to life. What are you stumbling across that maybe you would like to share with Julie and I? Are you listening to any really good podcasts? Let us know over on Instagram. We personally, we love this type of thing because this is Julie and I pretty much unplugged. When we in IRL, right? These are the things we talk about. Well, that and a lot. This and Zoe, frankly.
Yep, that's about it. French bulldogs, maybe.
That's pretty much it. And so if you have any suggestions for us, please do share them with us. If you like Julie and I presenting this type of thing, also give us that feedback because frankly, we'd like to do more of it.
And tell us what you're interested in.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts.
Exactly. And we don't always want to talk about real estate, neither you guys, because man, that gets boring.
Seriously. Who does that?
Speaking of which, if you just want to hear Tim and Julie doing real estate, we do that well too, evidently. So you can listen to all of our past podcasts. We have literally thousands and thousands of past podcasts. Thank you for continuing to keep this podcast so highly rated on iTunes. And there's literally thousands of you that download and stream us and listen to us on YouTube every single day. It really does help us to stay in alignment with our highest and truest purpose on this planet, which is being of service to all of you. God gave us all a group of, all of us have influence, whether you have influence over thousands of people or millions of people or even just dozens of people. Those are the people that you're supposed to be having the impact on. Real estate is a blessing because it puts you in a position where you can truly be of high service to as many people as you choose to be. And hopefully we're enlightening you as much as we can and to the realization that you are in the right place at the right time. We absolutely are in the new golden age. We didn't talk about technology and AI. We didn't talk about all the other things that you would have thought we would have talked about because really the whole spiritual revolution, not even spiritual is a woo-woo word. Mm-hmm. The return to Christian values, Judeo-Christian values, that's really what we're experiencing, certainly in the United States. And I'll venture a guess that we're going to see that expanding globally. Embrace it. Understand it. And if you're in conflict with it, we challenge you to maybe give yourself an opportunity, give yourself a little grace and drill down and maybe realize that the reason you have the thoughts and you have the beliefs that you do are because you have been trapped in somebody else's hamster cage. Because you have been implanted with maybe thoughts and beliefs that maybe served you in the past but don't serve you now. So give yourself an opportunity to hit hard reset and embrace the amazing gift that all of us have. That is a gift from God, which is called life. And share this podcast with other people. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.